The world was never meant to hear Lieutenant Mara Elling's final message, but the moment her voice cracked through the static, history itself split open. It was 2:14 hours when the transmission erupted into the Allied listening post hidden beneath the chalk cliffs of Dover, an empty corridor, a single flickering bulb, and a lone operator who would swear, for the rest of his life, that the voice he heard that night was speaking from somewhere no human should have been. If anyone hears this, they've opened it. God help us. The message cut. A shriek of metal. Then silence. Corporal James Warlow, frozen before the receiver, felt the blood drain from his face. No Allied operative named Mara Elling was scheduled for field operations. No frequency existed with the signature she used. And no route was known behind the Arctic Circle where she claimed to be transmitting from in earlier logs that military archivists would swear never existed. Yet the voice returned. But not as speech. A rhythm. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Another pause. James recognized it instantly, Morse. But not military. Older. Pre-war. A civilian cipher code used by a small forgotten expedition in the 1920s. His throat tightened. They taught this code only once, in a single briefing, regarding a mission that was supposedly shelved forever. The Valkyrie Protocol. The mission that never officially happened. The discovery no historian was ever allowed to write. The first secret. James's hands trembled violently as he scribbled the taps onto a sheet of ration paper. The coded words formed slowly, each letter chiseling a cold dread into his spine. The door is open. He swallowed. Then the second line appeared, they are not dead. Then, stop the siren. He stared in disbelief. There was no siren in Allied operations. There was only one siren. A machine. Buried in ice. A discovery older than the war. The thing the 1920s expedition had found frozen, humming faintly, a cylindrical object carved with symbols no linguist could identify. Something that emitted low-frequency pulses. Something that repeated, endlessly, the same mechanical whisper, Chi Omicron Rho Chi Omega Rho Tau Lambda Omicron. A Greek phrase. Translation, the dance without end. The expedition reported one final observation before vanishing. The machine seemed to awaken when human conflict intensified. Then the government buried the report. Classified the object. Sealed it inside the Arctic vault. And then salted the earth with silence. James exhaled sharply. His breath fogged the cold air. This wasn't possible. The siren machine couldn't be active. It had never been used. Never been touched. Unless, a violent tremor shook the receiver. Static erupted like a scream. Then Mara's voice returned, raw, shredded, terrified. They've triggered it. They're using it, they're using the frequency to gunfire. Shouting. A distant, low mechanical pulse. A sound deeper than anything built by human hands. James staggered backward. At that exact moment, across the English Channel, thousands of German soldiers reportedly woke from sleep screaming, soldiers who claimed to hear a song made of cold metal inside their skulls. Pilots grounded. Officers collapsed. A general in Berlin fainted mid-briefing, clutching his head, whispering the same Greek words from the machine. James didn't know it yet, but he had just witnessed the activation of a world-altering technology, one that would later become the centerpiece of the most hidden truth about the war. A secret so protected that entire divisions were wiped from records. A weapon no side could fully control, and both sides feared equally. He tore off his headset and stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath, the ration paper clenched in his fist. In a dim corner, the duty officer stepped forward. Commander Rowe. An older man with a scar running across his cheek, eyes like cracked granite. You heard it, didn't you? Rowe said quietly. James froze. How do you? Rowe extended his hand. Give me the paper, son. Now. James hesitated. Rowe stepped closer. It started again, the commander whispered. And this time, we don't have the luxury of pretending it doesn't exist. James's hand shook as he handed him the crumpled sheet. Rose scanned it, jaw tightening. Then he said the words that would drag James into a conspiracy older than the war itself. Lieutenant Elling has been dead for 15 years. James's heart stopped. Rowe leaned in. And tomorrow, we leave for the ice. The world looked different at the edge of the map. James Warlow stood on the deck of the retrofitted icebreaker Resolute, gripping the frozen railing as the ship plowed north through black waters that swallowed light whole. The wind bit like sharpened teeth. The sky above churned with low, bruised clouds that looked heavy enough to collapse. And beneath it all, a silence stretched across the world like a held breath. They had been traveling for 6 days. 6 days since the transmission. 6 days since Commander Rowe ordered their departure. 6 days since James realized, with crushing, nauseating certainty, that everything he had been taught about the war was incomplete at best, and intentionally misleading at worst. Rowe emerged on deck, collar turned up against the cold, watching James with an expression that was part scrutiny, part pity. "You're thinking too loudly," Rowe said. James forced a humorless laugh. "Hard not to." Rowe moved beside him, his boots crunching against frost. "We're close," he murmured. "Close to something we hoped we'd never have to see again." James swallowed hard. The siren machine. Rowe didn't respond immediately. He looked out toward the horizon, where jagged shards of ice rose like the bones of ancient beasts. Then he spoke quietly. "It wasn't always called that." James turned. Rowe continued, voice low and heavy. "In the original files, the ones locked away before you were born, it was designated Artifact Sigma 3. We didn't know what it was. Only what it did." "And what did it do?" James whispered. Rowe exhaled, slowly, painfully. "It listened." A chill deeper than the Arctic wind ran down James's spine. "What do you mean?" Rowe turned to face him. "The machine wasn't built to transmit. It was built to receive. We eventually discovered that Sigma 3 reacts to, amplifies, human conflict. Fear. Violence. Hatred. The more war there is, the stronger it becomes." James's throat tightened. "But that makes no sense." "Machines don't. This one isn't a machine," Rowe cut in sharply. "Not in any way we understand. It's older than any of us. Older than this war. Older than the last one. Maybe older than humanity." James stared at him. "You're telling me the Nazis found it?" Rowe's jaw clenched. "They didn't just find it," he said. "They learned how to use it." James's breath caught. Rowe continued. "And if Mara Elling was transmitting, it means they activated the second chamber." "Second? What second chamber?" Rowe didn't answer. Instead, he handed James a thin metal case. "Open it." Inside lay a single black and white photograph. An expedition team from the 1920s. 15 men and women standing proudly on ice, bundled in heavy furs. But the camera had captured something else. Something behind them. A towering shape half encased in frost, cylindrical, metallic, scarred with deep grooves that looked almost carved by hand. Symbols spiraled around the surface, none resembling any known language. James felt his pulse spike. What is that?" "The thing we sealed away," Rowe whispered. "The thing Elling's team was sent to shut down. The thing the Nazis are now attempting to control." James looked back at the photograph. His eyes drifted to the faces in the image, stoic, determined, unaware of the doom behind them. Then he saw her. At the far right. Smiling faintly. Windswept hair partially obscuring her goggles. Lieutenant Mara Elling. James felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. But this is impossible," he said. "You told me she died 15 years ago." "She did. But she transmitted 6 days ago." "Yes," Rose said grimly. "And that means whatever's happening out there, death is no longer a certainty." James's skin crawled. Before he could respond, the ship lurched violently. Rose snapped to alertness. What was that? An alarm blared from the bridge. Crewmen shouted. Lights flickered. James and Rose sprinted inside. The captain barked orders. Sonar anomaly beneath us. Large structure, moving. Moving? Rose repeated sharply. James stared at the monitor. Something enormous, something impossibly large, slid beneath the ship. The sonar image distorted, warping as if the water around it vibrated at a frequency the equipment couldn't process. What the hell? James whispered. Then he heard it. A low hum. Too deep to be natural. Too steady to be accidental. The same sound he heard faintly in Mara Elling's last message. Rose's face turned white. No, he muttered. Not here. Not this far south. The hum grew louder. James staggered as the ship trembled again. Rose grabbed the radio. Engine room, full stop. Divert all power to stabilizers, now. Static. No response. The hum intensified, rising into a bone-shaking vibration that rattled every bulkhead. Crew members clapped hands over their ears, faces contorted in pain. James felt pressure build behind his eyes, like invisible fingers gripping his skull. Then, silence. Absolute, crushing silence. A heartbeat later, the hum returned, higher now. Sharper. Almost like a melody. James gasped. It's signaling, he whispered. It's trying to communicate, Rose finished grimly. The ship shuddered again. Then something broke the surface of the water off the port side. James's breath hitched. A spire of ice, no, metal encased in ice, rising several meters tall, humming with faint blue light beneath cracking frost. Sigma-3 fragment, Rose growled. Damn it. They relocated pieces. The spire pulsed. Blue. Again. Again. Like a heartbeat. James stumbled backward as the pulses grew faster. Then he realized something horrible. They weren't pulses. They were coordinates. Rose saw it too. They're guiding someone, he whispered. James's stomach twisted. Who? Rose turned to him slowly. The same people who activated it the first time. James felt cold spread through his bones. The Shadow Expedition? Rose nodded. They were never lost, he said. They simply stopped answering. James swallowed, barely able to speak. Because they weren't the same anymore, were they? Rose's voice dropped to a whisper. No. And if the Nazis have found them, if they've merged what's left of those people with the machine's influence, then we are about to face something beyond war. Something alive in ways we cannot comprehend. The hum surged. The deck lights flickered. The spire cracked, releasing a blinding flare of pale blue light. James staggered, blinded. Rose pulled him behind a support beam. Brace yourself, he shouted. The spire erupted. A shockwave slammed into the ship. Alarms wailed. Metal screamed. The entire vessel tilted as ice shattered across the water. James tumbled to the deck, vision swimming. Through the haze, he saw it, etched into the surface of the spire, glowing violently, Chi Omicron Rho Chi Omega Rho Tau Lambda Omicron. The dance without end. Then everything went black. James woke to darkness. Not night, darkness. A thick, suffocating black that pressed against his eyelids like wet cloth. His ears rang. His throat burned. His body throbbed from impact. For a moment he thought he was dead. Then he felt it, a faint vibration under his palms. Metal. Cold. The deck of the Resolute. He forced his eyes open. Dim emergency lights flickered overhead, painting the corridor in pulses of red. Alarms wailed in distant sections of the ship, distorted and broken. Smoke curled along the ceiling like restless spirits. He coughed hard, pushed himself upright, and realized the entire vessel was leaning sharply to port. Rose, he croaked. No answer. Row! Still nothing. Panic tightened around his chest. He staggered to his feet, gripping the wall, vision swimming. He stumbled forward, boots splashing through frigid seawater flooding the lower decks. As he turned a corner, a hand seized his shoulder. James spun around, fists up. Row stood there, soaked, bleeding from a cut over his brow, but alive. Barely. Good, Row rasped. You're awake. We don't have long. What happened? James demanded. The spire blew, Row said. A directed blast. Not meant to destroy us. Meant to warn us. Or signal something. James swallowed hard. Row pointed toward the stairwell. Bridge. Now. They climbed quickly, slipping on the flooded steps. Smoke thickened. The ship creaked ominously, as if it were being pulled downward by unseen hands. On the bridge, chaos reigned. Broken glass. Sparks. Steam pouring from ruptured pipes. The captain lay unconscious against the far bulkhead, groaning softly. 2 crewmen shouted over damaged equipment. Someone sobbed under their breath. But all of them froze when they saw the window. James stepped forward slowly. The ice field was gone. Instead, the sea around them churned in spirals, massive circular patterns etched across the water, glowing faintly blue beneath the surface. Like symbols. Like writing. Like something enormous had stirred beneath them, leaving glyphs James felt in his bones rather than understood with his mind. What? James whispered. What is that? Row's jaw tightened. The eye, he said quietly. James turned. The what? Row exhaled. The third secret. The air went still. Row continued, voice low and heavy with memory. There was a reason the 1920s teen went missing. A reason their photographs were seized. A reason their journals were burned. Not because Sigma-3 was dangerous, though it was, but because they found something larger. Something beneath it. James stared at the heaving, glowing water below. What did they find? Row closed his eyes. The eye in the ice. James waited, breath trembling. When they drilled beneath the surface, Row said quietly, they hit something hollow. A chamber. Inside it was carved a single massive indentation, perfectly circular, deeper than any natural structure should be. A dome? James asked. No, Row whispered. An eye. Looking up at them from the deep. James felt the air vanish from his lungs. Human, he asked. Row shook his head once. No. James's fingers tightened around the console. The eye radiated warmth, Row continued. Gave off its own luminescence. The team didn't know whether it was biological or mechanical. But they knew it wasn't dead. They reported that the chamber pulsed. James shuddered. And when they touched it, when they measured its frequency, they discovered Sigma-3's humming matched the pulse exactly. So they were linked. Yes, Row said. But that was just the start. James turned back to the spirals glowing beneath the ship. The symbols, he murmured. They're coming from the eye? Row nodded grimly. The chamber is awake again. A crack boomed through the hole. The ship listed harder. Crew members scrambled to steady equipment. We have to abandon ship, the captain rasped weakly from behind them. No, Row snapped. We can't. That thing will track movement. Boats on the water will only draw its attention. James felt cold sweat slide down his spine. Attention for what? Row met his eyes, tired, haunted, afraid. To read us, he said. James blinked. What does that mean? Row's voice thinned, as if speaking the truth pulled the breath from his lungs. The eye in the ice, it doesn't just listen like Sigma-3. It learns. It absorbs. It stores signals, memories, transmissions, thoughts. The 1920s teen reported hearing things, voices of people long dead, songs no one had sung, conversations that belong to no human tongue. James swallowed hard. And now it wants us? It recognized the activation, Rose said. It recognized conflict. Fear. War. And now, he motioned at the glowing spirals. It's calling something back. James opened his mouth to speak, but the words died. Something rose from the water. A huge shape beneath the spirals, dark, elongated, moving upward like a whale breaching, except too still, too rigid. A submerged structure. A pillar carved with the same symbols as Sigma 3. The crew gasped as it broke the surface, shedding water like a waking giant. Light pulsed through the grooves, lighting the storm-dark sky with blue fire. James stepped backward instinctively. Ro, what is that? Rose stared in horror. One of the 32. 32 what? Chambers, Ro whispered. The eye had 32 connected subchambers, or nerves, we never knew the right word. But if one is rising, he stopped. The pillar rotated. Slowly. Like it was looking at them. James's breath froze. Then a deafening tone ripped out of the structure, so loud James felt it in his bones. The entire ship groaned under the force. Lights burst overhead. James dropped to his knees, hands clamped over his ears. His skull felt like it was cracking open. Crew screamed around him. Through the agony, he barely heard Rose shout, "That's not communication, it's activation." Another tone blasted through the air, higher, sharper, slicing through oxygen and thought. James gasped as a flood of images slammed into his mind, a woman's silhouette on ice, chamber lined with symbols, a circle of blue light pulsing like a heartbeat, a face turning toward him through a veil of frost, Elling. James hurled himself backward, panting. The pillar fell silent. Then, from the spirals below, a new sound rose. Not mechanical. Not human. A whisper. Soft. In a language James did not, and yet somehow did, understand. Chi Omicron Rho Chi Omega Rho Tau Lambda Omicron, the dance without end. Rho grabbed James by the collar. We have to go. Now. The ship lurched violently as the pillar sank again, receding into darkness. James stumbled after Rho, slipping on wet metal. Where are we going? He gasped. Rho didn't look back. To the coordinates Ellen gave us, he said. The machine isn't the threat. James's heart pounded. Then what is? Rho stopped, eyes full of dread. The expedition she led into the ice. A beat. The people who never came home. James felt the world tilt. You mean, Rho nodded. They're still alive. The winter of 1941 settled over Europe like a shroud, cold, suffocating, and deceptively quiet. The major powers clashed openly on every front, but beneath the surface, a second war unfolded, one fought in the shadows by men and women whose names would never appear in textbooks. These were the ghosts of World War II, operatives denied even the dignity of official existence. Their missions were considered too dangerous, too unorthodox, and too politically volatile to be linked to any nation. And among them was the secret that would later be labeled the fourth hidden truth, a truth historians never intended the public to know. Entire battles in World War II were won not by armies, but by agents who were never formally recorded, acknowledged, or even alive on paper. This was the Silent Front. 1. The Ghost Ledger. At the heart of it was a classified registry known only as the Ghost Ledger, a thin, oil-stained notebook stored in a steel vault beneath an MI6 safe house in Gibraltar. Only 4 people had ever seen it, and all of them had signed agreements that were burned upon completion. The ledger contained 72 names, no ranks, no birthplaces, no service numbers. Just code names. Among them, Wraith Linnet Cinder Moth Sable, and at the bottom, written in a different hand, underlined twice, Talon. That same name Lena discovered in the bunker records in Part 2. The Ghost Ledger represented a unit that did not officially exist, reporting to a branch of Allied intelligence disbanded and erased after the war, Division 6, the Chroma Directorate. Its agents operated under one brutal rule: complete the mission, or be disavowed forever, even in death. This was the price of invisibility. 2. The operation that should not have worked. One of the most consequential missions of the Ghost Ledger took place far from the main theaters of war, in the Balkans, where partisan groups and occupying forces created a labyrinth of shifting alliances. The mission, codenamed Operation Lantern, involved preventing a German breakthrough toward the eastern Mediterranean. It was not a battle historians ever covered. There were no official troop movements, no sanctioned reinforcements, no Allied units in the area. At least, none that existed. Instead, 5 Ghost Ledger operatives infiltrated deep behind the lines to sabotage a supply convoy critical to the German advance. They were Linnet, linguistic prodigy, expertly disguised as a German radio operator. Cinder, explosives specialist with an uncanny ability to mimic civilian traits. Sable, master of covert transport, could drive, pilot, or sail anything. Moth, infiltration expert, could disappear into shadows even in broad daylight. Talon, the one whose file was completely redacted. The one Lena was now chasing decades later. Their objective was simple but almost suicidal: destroy a moving target protected by 200 soldiers using only the tools they could carry on foot. And they succeeded. But the aftermath was more complicated, and darker, than any official account would ever allow. 3. The disappearance of Talon. Talon was considered the anchor of their team, not a leader, but a stabilizing presence who could read a battlefield like sheet music. Every surviving report from partisans and local resistance mentioned the same thing: Talon moved as if he already knew the outcome. His instincts were unnerving. His precision bordered on unnatural. His ability to predict German reactions felt almost prophetic. The others trusted him implicitly. On the 5th night of their operation, Talon split from the group to scout ahead. It was routine. But when dawn broke, he was gone: no footprints, no signs of struggle, no German patrols nearby. He had simply vanished. The official Ghost Ledger entry for Talon had only one word added afterward: missing, not recovered. But the classified annotation beneath it, scribbled hastily, smudged as if someone had tried to erase it, told a very different story, cited 48 hours later. Not alone. The identity of who, or what, Talon was seen with has been lost. The ink dissolved long before archivists retrieved the pages. The rest of the team completed the mission, blowing the convoy off a mountain pass and preventing a German breakthrough that would have destabilized the entire Balkan resistance movement. History recorded the German failure simply as logistical complications. The Ghost Ledger recorded it as Lantern complete. Agent loss, 1 pending. 4. The quiet war after Lantern. The Chroma Directorate sent agents into every theater, buried in civilian populations, embedded in neutral nations, hiding among retreating armies, or infiltrating German divisions with flawless accents and forged papers. Their influence was everywhere yet nowhere: a mysterious fire in a fuel depot in Sicily before the Allied invasion. A perfectly timed accident that derailed a train carrying V2 components. A forged communique that redirected an entire German battalion to an empty valley. A vanished Luftwaffe officer whose credentials were later found on a dead Allied agent. These were not accidents. These were operations historians dismissed because they seemed too convenient. But the Ghost Ledger's cross-reference notations told a cohesive story, a shadow war constantly tipping the scales in the Allies' favor. And the most concerning detail, according to the fragments Lena had discovered, was that Talon's codename continued appearing even after his disappearance was recorded. At least 7 further operations bore the small, almost inconspicuous notation: Talon, secondary confirmation. Someone using his codename was still active. But was it really him? 5. The cover-up. By 1946, the Chroma Directorate had become a liability. The Cold War was beginning to form, and alliances were shifting. Agents who had been invaluable during the war were now considered dangerous loose ends, people who knew too much and didn't officially exist. Governments needed clear narratives, not messy truths. So Division 6 was dissolved. The Ghost Ledger was sealed. The agents who survived were reassigned, imprisoned under aliases, or quietly removed from existence. The others, the dead or missing, were erased entirely. No graves. No medals. No acknowledgements. Just silence. And this silence was the fourth hidden truth. A truth Lena now realized she was closer to than any historian before her. Because Talon, her father, was still the central ghost in this forgotten war. And someone, somewhere, had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep his true story buried. Lena had spent years combing archives, deciphering coded telegrams, and cross-referencing mission reports that had supposedly never existed. But nothing shook her as deeply as the moment she finally held it in her trembling hands, the ghost ledger. Not the one she had pieced together from fragments. Not the scans she had discovered buried inside mislabeled MI6 folders. But the original. A thin, battered notebook sealed in brown wax and stamped with a unit that officially was dissolved before it was even acknowledged, Chroma Directorate, Division 6. She found it deep within a private estate archive belonging to a retired intelligence officer's family, an estate she had gained access to only after filing 3 separate legal petitions and 1 anonymous tip from a contact she still didn't fully trust. The basement smelled of dust and cold stone. A single hanging bulb flickered overhead. And on a wooden table sat the ledger. The cover was cracked, the edges curled. It looked unremarkable. Ordinary, even. But as Lena ran her fingers over it, she felt something underneath the leather, indentations, symbols, faint impressions made decades earlier. A code. And suddenly she realized, the ledger wasn't a simple list of names. It was a cipher. The names, the dates, the ink smudges, it was all part of an encrypted map. A map that would reveal something larger than any historian had ever uncovered. Larger even than Division 6. Something tied directly to Talon. 1. Patterns of the invisible. She flipped through the brittle pages carefully, afraid the paper might disintegrate under her touch. 72 code names. 72 people who had never been officially alive. Next to many of the names were symbols, triangles, circles, slashes, dots. None of them appeared to correlate to missions or locations. But when Lena looked at the ledger sideways under the flickering light, something clicked. The symbols weren't random. They formed sequences. 7 sequences. 7 patterns repeated across 2 years of covert operations, hidden inside scratches, ink blots, and page folds. She laid out a sheet of tracing paper and began copying them. Slowly, the patterns aligned into what looked like a grid, a massive, meticulous structure that spanned the entire book. And when she finally completed it, she stared at a geometric cipher unlike anything she had ever seen. It was beautiful. Complex. Precise. It looked like a lattice of coordinates, geographical coordinates. But one sequence, one repeating symbol, appeared more than any other, a small, sharp Talon-shaped mark, etched next to 16 missions. 16 missions Talon was supposedly not alive to participate in. Her heart pounded. Had her father continued working after he disappeared? Or had someone else used his identity? Or, worse, had the truth of his disappearance been fabricated from the beginning? 2. The man in the photograph at the back of the ledger, hidden beneath a layer of glued paper. Lena found a small black and white photograph. She lifted it carefully, revealing a face she recognized instantly. Her father. Younger. In uniform. But not the uniform of any Allied unit she knew. No insignia. No flag. No rank. Just a plain jacket with a small silver emblem on the collar, a symbol shaped like a geometric spiral. She had seen that symbol only once before, in decoded marginalia attached to Operation Lantern, where Talon disappeared. Along the bottom of the photograph, someone had written a phrase in German shorthand, Weiss was calmed. He knows what is coming. Lena's breath caught in her throat. What did he know? And why was this photo glued into the ghost ledger if he had vanished before half the missions were even carried out? She flipped the photograph over. On the back was a faint graphite imprint that looked like a partial address, or coordinates: 47.06 degrees north, 8.45 degrees east Switzerland. Neutral territory. A place where spies from every nation crossed paths in plain sight. Why there? Why him? And why now, after 75 years of silence, was the ledger pointing her directly to it? 3. The box of redacted truths inside the estate archive. Lena found a metal box locked with a rusted chain. After breaking it open, she discovered dozens of microfilms, classified communications between senior Allied intelligence officers. Nearly everything was redacted, except for 3 recurring phrases: Directive Helios. Non-existent operatives. Contain the divergence. Helios. Containment. Divergence. Words that indicated far more than covert missions. They suggested a factional break, a schism within Allied intelligence itself, something so severe it required erasing an entire division of operatives. The more she read, the more she sensed the truth. Division 6 wasn't shut down because it was no longer needed. It was shut down because it had begun operating beyond its chain of command. And if Talon had become involved in whatever Helios was, if he had known what is coming, if he had disappeared not because he died, but because he defected, or was taken, then everything Lena thought she understood about World War II was about to collapse. 4. The message hidden in ink. One final discovery awaited. On the front and side cover of the ledger, there was a blot of ink that looked accidental. But as Lena tilted the page, she saw faint uniform strokes beneath it, strokes overwritten, then covered deliberately. Someone had hidden a sentence under that blot. She held the page up to the light. The ink thinned. Words formed. 4 words. 4 words that changed the trajectory of her entire investigation. The war did not end. Lena froze. A chill crawled up her spine. Was it a metaphor? A warning? A message from a dying agent? Or was it literal? She flipped to the last page of the ledger. Blank. Except for one thing, a symbol drawn in graphite, a Talon-shaped mark in beneath it, a date, 1952. 7 years after the war ended. 7 years after the directorate dissolved. 7 years after Talon supposedly disappeared. But the ledger said he was still active. Still operating. Still writing. Her father hadn't died in 1943. He hadn't vanished. He had continued the mission. A mission that extended beyond the war itself. And if he was still working as late as 1952, she had only one more question left. What was so dangerous, so world-altering, that an entire branch of Allied intelligence had to be erased to conceal it? Lena closed the ledger, her hands shaking. The answer, she knew, lay with the coordinates in Switzerland. And with the next hidden truth, snow fell in thin spirals over Lake Lucerne as Lena stepped off the midnight train, the cold cutting sharply through her coat. Switzerland had always been a sanctuary of neutrality during the war. A place where diplomats whispered, spies traded secrets in cafes, and men wearing perfect suits orchestrated chaos from behind elegant curtains. But tonight, the city felt different. Too still. Too quiet. As if the past itself were holding its breath. The coordinates from the ghost ledger led her to a narrow cobblestone street lined with old townhouses. One, in particular, stood out only because it did not stand out at all. No nameplate, no curtains, no sign of occupancy. Just a door with peeling paint and an iron knocker shaped like an eagle's talon. She froze at the sight of it. Her father's symbol. A symbol that seemed to follow her now, etched into margins of files, hidden in photographs, embedded in code sequences. And now standing before her in the real world, as if inviting her inside. Or warning her away. Lena tightened her gloves, stepped forward, and knocked. The sound echoed down the empty street like a gunshot. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. 1. The keeper of silence. A man stood in the threshold, white-haired, thin, wrapped in a long wool coat. His eyes, however, were sharp. Too sharp. the eyes of someone who had spent his life seeing what others couldn't. "Lena Morrow," he said, as if greeting an expected guest. "You took longer than I thought." Her heart stumbled in her chest. "You know my name?" "I know far more than that," he replied. "Come. The street is not safe at this hour." She hesitated, every instinct screaming. But the ledger had brought her here. Her father's trail had led her here. So she stepped inside. The door shut behind her with a heavy thud, sealing her in. Warm lamplight filled the narrow hallway. The walls were lined with maps: Europe, North Africa, the Pacific. Red threads connected points across continents like veins. At the end of the hall was a small sitting room. The man motioned for her to take a seat. "My name is Adler," he said as he sat opposite her. "I served with your father." Lena went perfectly still. Her mouth went dry. "My father died in 1943. "No," Adler said softly. "That is the story they needed you to believe." Lena felt the floor tilt beneath her, a slow, nauseating shift in reality. "You knew him?" she whispered. "I knew Talon," Adler corrected. "The man the world never met." Her pulse hammered so violently she could barely hear. "What happened to him?" she asked. "Why did he disappear? Why did Division 6 vanish from the records?" Adler leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Because the war that ended in 1945, he said, was not the only war being fought. 2. Directive Helios." He stood and retrieved a file from a drawer, thin, bound with a black string. He placed it gently on the table between them. Stamped across the cover were 2 words, Directive Helios, the same phrase Lena had seen redacted across countless microfilms. Adler opened the file. "There were some," he said, "who believed Nazi Germany's defeat would not be the end, but only an intermission." She listened in absolute silence. Certain factions, scientists, intelligence officers, ideologues, did not vanish when Berlin fell. They slipped through the cracks, crossed borders unnoticed, and carried with them something far more dangerous than weapons. "What?" Lena breathed. "Knowledge," Adler said. "Plans. Programs that were never meant to survive the war. And networks of influence built across Europe and the Middle East. Division 6's task was to intercept these post-war movements before they solidified into something that could ignite the world all over again." Cold dread seeped into her bones. "And my father?" "He was their finest," Adler said. "Until he discovered something he was not meant to find." He slid a single folded page across the table. "Read." Lena unfolded it. Operation Morrow. Her breath caught. Her hands trembled. A mission. But not assigned to her father. Assigned against him. "What is this?" she whispered. Adler's expression hardened. "The moment your father uncovered Helios's deepest secret, he became a threat to both sides." "Both sides?" "Division 6, Adler said, was split from within. Some agents wanted to expose Helios. Others wanted to continue its work." She stared at him, shock taking root in every nerve. "My father was hunted." "He went underground," Adler confirmed. "And he did something none of us anticipated." "What?" she whispered. Adler looked her directly in the eyes. "He kept fighting. Long after the world celebrated victory." 3. The message that never reached its target. Adler stood, walked to a locked chest by the fireplace, and retrieved a small cloth-bound envelope. He held it as though it were fragile enough to crumble under her breath. "He left this," Adler said. "For you." "For me?" Lena's voice cracked. "He wrote it in 1952. I was tasked with delivering it, if circumstances ever demanded it." "Why now?" she asked. Adler's expression turned sorrowful. "Because the truth he died protecting has resurfaced." Lena's heart seized. She took the envelope and slid a trembling finger under the flap. Inside was a single sheet of thin paper. Her father's handwriting, sharp, clean, unmistakable. She read the first line, "Lena, If this reaches you, then the war I fought has reached you as well. Tears blurred the ink. She continued reading, you must understand, the mission did not end when Germany fell. A second shadow war emerged, one built not on nations, but on men who believe they know what the world must become. Division 6 fractured. Some of us tried to stop them. Others helped them hide. I have seen what they plan. It must never come to pass. Her throat tightened painfully. You will find the truth where Helios was born. Follow the coordinates. Trust no one who claims the war is over. At the bottom was a final line, the real enemy survived. Lena lowered the letter with shaking hands. Her father had died fighting a war that wasn't supposed to exist. And now that war was reaching her. Adler watched her quietly, his old eyes full of something like grief. You understand, now, he said. Why Division 6 vanished. Why your father disappeared. Why he could not return. Lena wiped a tear from her cheek. What did he mean? Where Helios was born. Adler turned toward the map on the wall. He pointed to a small, isolated valley on the German-Austrian border. Because Helios, he said, was born in the one place even the Allies feared to explore. A place buried under decades of lies. He met her eyes. And now, Lena, you must go there. The road into the German-Austrian borderlands was little more than a scar carved through dense forest, narrow, winding, and treacherously silent. Lena's headlights cut through swirls of fog as she followed the coordinates from her father's letter. With every mile she traveled deeper into the mountains, her pulse thudded harder, syncing with the engine's rumble. This was where Helios was born. Where Division 6 fractured. Where Talon, her father, fought his final, hidden battle. The mountains rose around her like dark sentinels. Pine trees pressed in on either side, branches heavy with frost. The night felt ancient here, as though it remembered everything men had tried to bury. Finally, the road ended at an abandoned checkpoint, rusted gates, shattered glass, a weather-beaten sign warning trespassers in 3 languages. Lena parked and stepped out into the biting cold. The silence was unnerving. Not a sound. No wind. No birds. No distant hum of civilization. It was as if the valley itself held its breath. She pulled out the ghost ledger, its pages fluttering in the chilled air, and followed the compass drawn into the coded patterns she had deciphered earlier. The trees thinned. A clearing opened. And Lena saw it. 1. The hidden facility nestled against the mountainside was a bunker, half-collapsed, overgrown with moss and ivy, its metal doors buckled outward from some ancient explosion. Faded paint on the exterior wall revealed a symbol underneath the corrosion, the geometric spiral. The same spiral on her father's collar in the photograph. Her stomach dropped. Helios had been real. Alive. Physical. A place that once thrummed with the pulse of forbidden research and covert intelligence. Now it lay dormant. But not dead. Lena stepped closer. Her boots crunched over gravel and fragments of glass. When she reached the door, she pressed her hand to the cold steel. It felt oddly warm beneath the surface, as if something still moved behind it. She inhaled sharply and squeezed through the narrow opening. The air inside smelled of rust and memory. Her flashlight swept across the rubble-strewn hallway, overturned desks, collapsed shelves, torn cables dangling like vines. And still, there was order hidden beneath the chaos. Footprints in old dust. Not old enough. Someone had been here recently. The thought tightened her chest. She pressed deeper into the bunker, following a descending corridor that spiraled into the mountain's heart, an architecture eerily similar to the coded spiral symbol itself. Finally, the hallway opened into a large chamber. And at its center stood a figure. 2. The man who survived the end. He was thin, stooped, wearing a coat far too light for the weather outside. His white hair brushed his shoulders, and his hands clutched a cane carved with a Talon-shaped mark. When he turned, Lena's breath froze in her lungs. The man's face, aged, weathered, lined with decades of silence, was unmistakable. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But the eyes. The eyes were her father's. He stared at her with an expression that was equal parts disbelief and heartbreak. Lena? Her knees nearly gave out. Dad, she whispered, stepping forward, tears already blurring her vision. He shook his head slowly, painfully, as though unused to the motion. You shouldn't have come. Lena rushed to him, but he raised a trembling hand. Please, he said softly. Let me see you. Just for a moment. She froze, trembling, forcing herself to look directly at him. Dad, how? Everyone said, you died. His eyes filled with a grief so heavy it felt like a physical weight. I died in the world that needed me gone, he said. But I lived in the world that still needed me. She didn't understand. Not yet. But the truth hovered at the edge of her mind, waiting to strike. What was Helios? She whispered. What was so dangerous that it forced you to disappear? He gestured weakly toward the chamber around them. Helios wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a technology. It was an idea. He stepped toward the wall and pressed a panel. A hidden compartment slid open, revealing rows of files, reels of microfilm, coded documents, and logbooks. Some were German. Others British. A few bore the insignia of nations that were still adversaries today. All these years, he said, I've kept what remained of Helios locked away. Because if it escaped, if even one faction obtained these plans, the world would be thrown into chaos. Lena approached, staring at the files. What plans? She asked. The kind, he said, that would allow a small group of men to destabilize nations without firing a single shot. The kind that would let them reshape world order from the shadows. She felt cold. This was going to be used after the war? It already was, he whispered. In small ways. Quiet ways. I stopped what I could. Others continued without me. Lena's heart ached. Why didn't you come home? His face crumpled. Because they would have followed. And the only person they would hurt more than me was you. Her chest tightened with a mix of gratitude and unbearable sorrow. You chose to disappear, she whispered. I chose to protect you. 3. The last secret. A low rumble vibrated through the bunker. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Her father's eyes flicked to the entrance. They found us, he said. Who? Lena demanded. The ones who still believe in Helios, he whispered. The ones who never stopped. They've been searching for this place for decades. Another rumble. Footsteps. Voices echoing through the corridors. Her father gripped her hand. Listen to me, he said urgently. Everything you've uncovered, the ledger, the directives, the operations, it's only the surface. The truth is deeper. He pressed a small black capsule into her palm. This contains everything they can't afford to let the world know. Take it. Protect it. She shook her head violently. No. You're coming with me. His eyes softened with immense, heartbreaking love. Lena. I can't leave. Not anymore. The voices grew louder. Boots pounding. Weapons clattering. Her father stepped back, placing himself between her and the approaching danger. You must go, he said. Now. Dad, he gave her one final, trembling smile, the smile she had lived her entire life trying to remember. I'm proud of you, he whispered. You finished what I started. Tears streamed down her face. She hesitated, 1 second, 2, but in those seconds, the war her father fought in silence finally caught up to them. Gunfire echoed down the hall. Her father shoved her toward a side passage she hadn't noticed. Run. She ran. Through darkness. Through twisting corridors. Through the last remnants of a war she never knew she'd inherited. Behind her, the chamber erupted with shouts and the thunder of weapons. She didn't look back. She burst out into the freezing night. Snow swirled around her. The valley trembled as explosions shook the mountain. The bunker, the birthplace of Helios, began to collapse. And with it, the last traces of Division 6. And her father. Lena fell to her knees, sobbing into the snow, the small black capsule clutched tightly in her fist. Above her, dawn slowly bled across the sky. She stared at the horizon, tears freezing on her cheeks. The war her father fought was over. But her war, the legacy he left her, had just begun. Inside the capsule lay the seventh and final secret. A secret still waiting to be told.